Throughout history, mighty rivers, treacherous swamps, and vast oceans have presented natural strategic barriers that shielded nations from many outward attacks. They also served as a natural multiplier of force for the defender. However, with the rise of global empires and expanding spheres of influence across the continents, those waters became ever more necessary to cross. A specialized force of naval infantry was needed to extend a nation's ability to wage war across the seas: the Marine. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time special about the Marines. Historically, the roots of naval infantry go as far back as Roman times, where heavily armored legionnaires were attached to warships for boarding actions in the Mediterranean. Or look at the Vikings, warriors equally skilled in shipcraft and splitting heads. But it was not until the age of the sail and large armadas that the first modern naval infantrymen appeared. When two battle lines clashed on the high seas, each usually tried getting close enough to deliver a devastating broadside cannon attack. And from atop masts or on the quarterdecks, the naval infantrymen sniped at the enemy crew or prepared for boarding. That was one of the quickest methods to put a ship out of action. And heavily armed Marines could wreak serious havoc on a ship that put its trust in lightly armed sailors. The Marines also guarded the ship's officers and, if push came to shove, would suppress mutinies or enforce discipline. Naval infantry patrolled harbors and coastal facilities, guarded magazines to prevent sabotage, or even dragged rowdy sailors out of harbor brothels. Eventually, the age of the sail came to an end, and warships were powered with coal and oil. But the basic principles of maritime warfare and the duties of the Marines did not fundamentally change. The emergence of the dreadnought battleship in the early 20th century and the increase in range of modern naval guns, however, made boarding actions a thing of the past. Instead, Marines were increasingly involved in aggressive landing operations against pirates, native tribes, or enemy harbors. When, in 1904, a force of 350 Royal Marines stormed a fortified village in Somaliland to seize the mullah's weapons, military men called it a prime example of modern warfare. The Marines had aggressively pushed forward, covered by the firepower of Maxim machine guns and ship artillery, and conquered the heights with minimal losses. It seemed like such amphibious operations were the future of naval warfare. Clausewitz, however, had warned commanders before of landing operations. Whether he meditates bringing on a decisive battle after crossing or may expect the enemy to attack him, he exposes himself to great danger. Therefore, without a decided superiority, both in moral and physical force, a general will not place himself in such a position. His words would come true in 1915, with the repeated attempts of the Entente forces to land and break through on the shores of the Gallipoli Peninsula. The men were pinned down by rifle fire from the heights, and the overwhelmed officers hesitated to push, even in the face of oftentimes numerically smaller resistance. The few experienced Marines on the beaches were unable to do much more than help secure the beachheads. Naval guns with their flat trajectory and armor-piercing ammunition did little against solitary enemy snipers. And although the Great War would see successful amphibious operations, Gallipoli remained the thorn in the minds of naval tacticians. Nevertheless, in the years leading up to the Second World War, navies re-evaluated the future of amphibious landings. Naval aircraft was rapidly evolving, and prototypes of landing craft and amphibious vehicles were available. In theory, amphibious operations and regular ground warfare do share the same tactical principles. The obvious difference is that an amphibious assault is launched from the sea. But tightly packed in barges or lighters, a waterborne force would be completely powerless without support, with no chance of reacting to enemy actions until reaching the beach. Then, at the water's edge, it starts from zero and has to rapidly increase in strength if it wants to survive. So the Marines were needed to act as a fighting shore party under the direct close support of naval guns and aircraft. Established in 1664, the British Royal Marines were among the most experienced when it came to laying the groundwork for modern naval infantry. They underwent physical fitness tests, discipline drills, and gunnery training. They also needed to possess competent technical knowledge and know arithmetic, algebra, and trigonometry. Much focus was also set on traditional naval knowledge like knotting and splicing, hammock slinging, and boat pulling. Approbation of zeal, gallantry, and good conduct were among the key characteristics of the force, which by the Second World War has evolved into an elite formation. After successfully providing cover in the evacuation from Dunkirk, the Royal Marines concentrate on small-scale amphibious operations. By 1942, they have spearheaded a landing in Norway, stormed a French coastal battery at Madagascar, and been shipped into Crete to defend it against a German invasion. Yet British admirals are reluctant to try a major landing on the continent, fearing another Gallipoli-style disaster. Instead, Britain has decided to push the Royal Marines into the commando role. Although initially recruited from the army, Lord Mountbatten went on the record stating that the Royal Marines were Britain's natural commando force. Trained in light infantry tactics, it seemed only a next step to train for unconventional raiding techniques. For example, the Royal Marines have established a designated cliff assault wing, where they train for assaulting enemy coastal installations from the most unexpected angles. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, has not been quite so sure what to do with their Marines. Established back in 1705 by Tsar Peter I, the Russian Marines were recruited from the Guards regiments. Yet, though the Baltic Fleet really worked for the Bolshevik cause after the October Revolution, Joseph Stalin remained rather ignorant of amphibious warfare beyond continental land frontiers. Traditionally, Soviet Marines protected the Union's coastal flanks. In 1941, as had happened to the Black Sea Fleet at Sevastopol in 1854 and to the 1st Pacific Squadron at Port Arthur in 1905, ships and naval bases were stripped of all combat personnel and they went to the front lines, this time against the Axis advance. Yet, the Red Navy regarded the costly frontline service with pride. There was a border marker beyond which the Hitlerites were unable to pass, precisely in the sector of the front defended by the naval infantry. They were first considered as support for the Red Army, but the special combat value of the Marines made them valuable assault troops. In early July 1941, the Marines carried out several amphibious landings on the eastern shore of Zapadnaya Litsa Bay, hitting the German seaward flank in front of Murmansk. Later in the war, Soviet Marines will execute maritime raids from the Arctic Circle to Leningrad and to Sevastopol. Since the Soviets lack dedicated landing craft, they experiment with torpedo boats and smoke screens to maximize speed and surprise. The idea of a special forces role is also there in the Red Navy. Across the Russian rivers and swamps, small groups of Marines can perform missions of sabotage and reconnaissance. This has led to advanced training in unconventional warfare and advanced courses like parachuting and mountain warfare. Over the course of the war, the Soviet Marines will rise to over 200,000 strong, with the reputation as an elite assault force. Not for their dark uniforms alone will they earn the name Black Death. In the Pacific, American strategists planned for a future war against Imperial Japan from the early 1920s. But Japan might make the first strike against U.S. possessions. In preparation for that, U.S. Marines were tasked with guarding advanced bases, from Hawaii to Guam to the Philippines. In combination with fixed defenses like mines, searchlights, and artillery, they would act as a mobile defense force. Some 30,000 Marines had accompanied the American Expeditionary Corps to the battlefields of Europe in the Great War and returned as the Devil Dogs, drilled in bombing, gas, and modern squad techniques. After that, the Marine Corps devoted time and energy to rifle and target practice, and policy was that no Marine was to be sent overseas who had not qualified as a marksman. During this war, the U.S. Marine Corps rapidly expands. 28,000 men were Marines in July 1940, but by January 1945, that number has increased to over 420,000 men and women, from the main Fleet Marine Force to aircraft wings and the shore reserves. They also begin experimenting with a new type of raiding force. In the annual fleet landing exercises, Flex 7, in February 1941, the Corps shows off small groups of Marines in rubber boats being dropped off from high-speed transports and destroyers into the water. Once on shore, they wage a small-scale guerrilla war in preparation for the actual invasion. General Holcomb says, "The organization, equipment, and training of infantry units of the Marine divisions should, in practically all respects, be identical to that of the commandos. In general, it may be stated that the training of all units in the two Marine divisions prepares them to carry out either offensive operations on a large scale or small-scale amphibious raids of the type carried out by the commandos." Across the ocean, the Japanese Navy long envisioned an aggressive push through the South Seas islands. Military dominance was to be achieved through a series of amphibious landings, wresting control from local, American, European defenders. Japan steadily enlarged its Marine Corps, the Kaiheidan, with the most promising recruits from the Imperial Navy. Each of Japan's 4 naval districts, Yokosuka, Kure, Sasebo, and Maizuru, was responsible for training its own regiments. The Japanese Navy also established a dedicated landing force, the Kaigun Rikusentai, naval infantry that acts like independent battle groups and are thrown together ad hoc when the situation demands it. So they enjoy a larger amount of tactical flexibility than regular Japanese forces, which is often needed under fire at the beachheads. An even more experimental force is the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force. Established in the second half of 1941, the Yokosuka Rikusentai are basically Marine paratroops, trained in all sorts of technical, naval, and combat techniques. Their main job is to assault coastal defenses and take objectives relevant to the landing, like airfields and gun batteries. They took part in the invasions of Dutch West Timor and the Philippines, and their enemies there spoke of highly capable troops that fought with tenacity and spirit far beyond that of the regular troops. So we see that although naval infantry has existed for quite a long time, it's truly the Second World War that really shapes the Marines into the modern role that we recognize today, whether maritime jacks of all trades to specialized assault and commando units, and it is and will be on the shores and beaches of Europe and the Pacific Islands where their mettle is truly tested. If you'd like to see another special episode about another special unit, you can check out this one on the German Fallschirmjäger right here. Any minute now, it's going to come up. And check out our series of collectibles over at the Time Ghost Barracks. There's loads of cool stuff there to put all over your body from head, maybe not toe. Yeah, from head to toe. Yeah, there's socks, right? There's socks? I don't know if there's socks, but from head to knee, at least. There's head to knee. And do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.